Las Vegas. The morning of the 1st of October, 1993. An armored truck stops behind Circus, carrying $3.1 million in cash for the weekend. Two guards shoulder a money bag and walk into the casino. They need only 20 minutes, like every other run. When they come back out, the lot is empty, the truck is gone. Scott freezes, his heart slamming his chest, his throat drying out like he swallowed sand. And the cruelest truth is that the person driving was not a stranger. It was someone who had been with them since the start of the shift. Scott takes a few steps like a man who has lost his soul, eyes sweeping the lot, ears ringing with the sound of blood pounding in his head. He calls her name, calls again, and hears only wind scraping along cold concrete. And then a tiny image snaps into focus, so clear it hurts. Heather's dress shoes. This morning he saw them, even almost smiled, thinking she must have plans after the shift. But now those shoes become a thorn lodged in his memory, beautiful and terrifying, because nobody wears elegant shoes to drive an armored truck unless they plan to walk out of their life in the middle of the workday. This was not a whim. This was a plan, made long before. San Francisco, spring of 1993. Before Heather Tallchief became a name on wanted posters, she was just a 21-year-old girl in hospital scrubs, moving through long white hallways where the smell of disinfectant clung to her hair, her skin, even her sleep. Heather worked as a nursing assistant in hospice, caring for AIDS patients in the harshest years of the epidemic. Many were still young. Their eyes still wanted to live, but their bodies were emptying out day by day. Heather changed bandages, handed out medication, adjusted pillows, wiped sweat from foreheads, then stood still for a few seconds to listen to them breathe. When she first started, Heather believed kindness could save people. She rode the bus to work before sunrise, carrying a small notebook to write down what each patient liked, just so they could feel respected. Sometimes she bought a cheap ice cream from a shop near the hospital and shared it with family members waiting in the corridor, because they were breaking too. But the more she tried to hold on to goodness, the smaller she felt in a storm with no ending. Some nights she stayed by a bedside longer than she was supposed to, because a patient was afraid to sleep, afraid to close their eyes, and never open them again. Someone would whisper for her to call their mother, someone would try to tell a childhood meal story, someone would stare at the ceiling as if counting what was left. Heather listened, nodded, placed a hand on a shoulder, like a promise that they were not alone. But when that door closed, she had to step into another room, another name, another story, and another goodbye already waiting. No one stayed behind to hold her when her shift ended. The next morning, that bed was empty. Again and again, Heather would connect with a person, remember what they liked, remember how they frowned when pain hit, remember the story they told about family, about love, about a trip they never got to take. Then she would lose them. Repeated loss does not explode like in movies. It leaks into you, day after day, wearing you down until you wake up and realize you are hollow. Heather reached a point where she could not cry anymore. She was just tired. Tired enough that even the sound of a ventilator became a steady knocking inside her skull. At some point, her body still went to work, but her mind had been left somewhere between all those farewells. Depression arrived quietly, heavy as stone. She needed something to silence the noise in her head, and cocaine showed up like a fake exit. At first, it was just to forget, to sleep, to stop hearing the names of the dead when she closed her eyes. But then, it stole what was left of her. Heather started arriving late, making more mistakes, her gaze drifting, and finally, she lost her job. A girl who once held other people up could not hold herself. One night, in a nightclub in the city, Heather sat still at the bar. Colored lights swept across her face like broken memories. The music hammered her chest, yet she felt cold. Around her were laughs and conversations, while she felt like she stood outside of life, watching it pass without being able to touch it. In that moment, Heather was not thinking about money, not thinking about a distant future. She was thinking about something very human, very small. If only someone would see her, ask if she was okay, and pull her out of the hole that was swallowing her. And then, right when Heather sat, like someone about to go out in the middle of those nightclub lights. A man walked up, Roberto Solis, 48, polished, confident, a faint, expensive cologne and a suit that fit like he never knew failure. He did not open with cheap lines. He opened with attention, the one thing Heather had not felt in a long time. A simple question, a smile timed just right, an unblinking look that seemed to say, "I see you. I understand you." Heather smiled back, maybe for the first time in months. And that alone was enough for a drowning person to believe they had found a lifeline. Roberto spoke like a man who knew how to listen. He praised Heather not for her looks, but for what she had endured, for how she kept trying to stand. He placed inside her the feeling of being valued, being held, being called a human being and not a failure. For Heather, it was not just a conversation. It felt like a small door opening inside a dark room. But Heather did not know the truth about the man sitting in front of her. And if she did, maybe she would not have been clear enough to grasp how dangerous it was. Because Roberto was not a man with a complicated past. He was a man who had killed, in 1969, in San Francisco, during a failed Loomis armored truck robbery. Roberto fired and killed a guard. A family lost a father, a child lost a guide, a death that left a tear no one could sew shut. Roberto was arrested, sentenced to life, spent 22 years behind bars. But in prison, Roberto learned something. If you cannot change the truth, change the story people attach to the truth. He wrote poetry, a lot of it. He wrote as if words could wash blood away. Under a pen name, he published books, received praise for being deep, seasoned, a soul that had walked through darkness. Poetry became a new coat, enough to make some people forget that inside was the man who pulled a trigger. And when Roberto was released in 1991, he stepped back into the world with a softer face, a warmer voice, and a disguise convincing enough that people could believe he had paid his debt. When he met Heather, Roberto did not just see a beautiful young woman. He saw a crack, a hollow space to fill, a person exhausted by loss, addicted, alone, desperate to cling to anyone who said, "You still matter." Heather's weakness was not greed. Her weakness was the need to be loved, to be protected, to have someone lead her out of the long night. Roberto understood that faster than anyone. And once a manipulator finds the right weakness, they do not need force. They only need words and time. In the summer of 1993, inside their small apartment, Roberto began pulling Heather into a strange world where everything moved slow, repeated, and wore you down until you no longer wanted to resist. He played VHS tapes filled with swirling colors, circles turning without end, like a door opening and closing inside the viewer's mind. Heather sat there, staring for hours. Roberto sat beside her, never rushing, never gripping her with hands, only guiding with his presence and an even voice. Later, some would call it brainwashing. Others would call it suggestion. But in that moment, for Heather, it felt like a long dream, where the longer she watched, the more tired she became. And the more tired she became, the easier it was to believe the man beside her knew what was right. Then Roberto said they would go to Mexico. Heather agreed, almost without needing a reason. 3 months passed, in unfamiliar streets, in a language that was not hers, and Heather depended on Roberto even more. And right when she had grown used to simply nodding, Roberto said it was time for the next step. Las Vegas, a city of lights and money, where people believe everything can be bought, even silence. Roberto gave instructions that were precise, like homework that had to be done correctly. Applied to Loomis Armored, Heather filled out the form, listed fake references, described a security job for an art collector who did not exist, a name that sounded respectable, a story that sounded reasonable, and the most frightening thing was that Loomis did not check deeply. They hired her. Heather stepped into the job wearing a face everyone could trust. She was on time, soft-spoken, hard-working, never causing trouble. Co-workers saw someone trying to rebuild her life, and they sympathized. Management saw stability, and they relaxed. Trust was built day by day, like small bricks, quiet and ordinary, until nobody could imagine she might do something wrong. Then she was placed on ATM runs, the biggest cash routes, where heavy money bags moved with the weekend pulse of an entire city. By now, Heather was not just the new hire. She was a link handed the key, and when you hand someone a key long enough, you forget they can use it to lock you out. Meanwhile, Roberto prepared the most important part, the escape route. He rented a warehouse, hung a sign that made it look harmless, like a normal armored vehicle service shop. He drew a map, not once, but many times, as if carving it into Heather's brain. He made her memorize every stretch, every turn, every intersection. Left here, right there, how many blocks, what sign to slow down for, what building to cue the next turn. Heather repeated it in her head like a prayer. Inside that small room, in quiet evenings, under Roberto's watch, like a teacher grading a student. And that is what chills you. Roberto did not just plan. He did not just instruct. He turned choices into habit, hesitation into reflex. By the time that day arrived, Heather no longer needed to think whether she should do it. She only needed to do what she had been taught, like a button already installed. He programmed the reflex. 7:30 in the morning. Heather wakes in a room still holding the cold of night. Roberto stands there, voice low but sharp, like a man rereading the final lines of a sentence. He repeats the route, repeats the warehouse, repeats the most important thing: do not hesitate. Heather nods. She does not argue, does not ask, does not have the energy to fight anymore, only a heavy feeling in her chest like she is carrying a stone. She walks to the shoe shelf and chooses the dress shoes. Polished, clean, wrong for a dusty armored truck shift, but perfect for something else, for a departure decided long before. 8 a.m. Heather arrives at the Loomis Depot and climbs into the driver's seat. The door shuts with a dry sound, like a lock clicking closed. Behind her is $3.1 million in cash, mostly hundreds and twenties, thin paper that can wake an entire city for the weekend. Scott Stewart and his partner sit in the back, exchange a few routine words, exhale like any other day. No one knows they are sitting beside a moment that will haunt them for life. The truck rolls forward, the engine steady, familiar streets sliding past the windows like an old film. 8:15. The truck stops behind Circus. Scott and his partner lift the money bag and step down. Shoulders heavy but minds light, because it is ordinary work. They disappear into the casino, lights and machines pulling them along like a current. They know they need 20 minutes, fill the ATMs, come back out, climb in, move on. Up front, Heather sits alone. She hears their footsteps fade, hears the door close, hears silence drop over the cab. Behind her is the money, in front of her is the road, and in her head, Roberto's map lights up, clear as a sign. 8:16. Heather's hand moves to the gear shift. There are moments when a small motion carries the weight of an entire life. She shifts, presses the pedal. The truck begins to move. No one chases, no siren, no one understands in time. Only a strange emptiness inside Heather, as if she has just cut the last thread, tying her to who she was. She follows the route she memorized, left turn, right turn, passing intersections. She has rehearsed 100 times in a cramped room under Roberto's eyes. The sign appears, the warehouse with harmless words that make it look like a normal shop. Heather turns in. Roberto is waiting. He steps to the driver's door, face tight as wire, eyes flicking like he fears the sky itself can listen. His first words are not, "Are you okay?" and not, "We did it." He says, "Give me the gun." Heather hands over her service weapon like a reflex, as if her hands no longer belong to her. Roberto barks at her to get out, his voice harsh, crude, the tenderness from that nightclub long gone. They open the back. Money stacked thick and heavy, enough to make you dizzy. Roberto starts moving it into another vehicle, into boxes, into containers, everything rushed as if they are running from time itself. Heather helps, working while her heart pounds, not from victory, but from a vague fear that if she stops for 1 second, she will collapse. In under 30 minutes, $3.1 million has left the armored truck. What used to be guarded by procedure, by trust, by routine, becomes cargo pushed away in silence. They leave the warehouse and rush toward the airport, afraid to look back. 9 a.m. At a private charter terminal, an elderly woman in a wheelchair is rolled onto a plane. The man pushing her wears a white coat, calm and professional, like a doctor escorting a patient. The scene looks so normal, nobody wants to stare. The plane takes off, and at a height where the ground turns into patches of color, the old woman stands, removes her wig, straightens her back, and walks. It is Heather. The man in the coat is Roberto. In that moment, the 21-year-old is no longer a Loomis employee, no longer a former nursing aide. She becomes a name slipping out of every hand. And at Circus, around that same time, Scott finishes his work. He steps out the back door, still feeling the weight of the cash bag in his arms, still calculating the next stops in his head. He looks across the lot, ready to call Heather and move on. But the lot is empty. Empty enough that you can hear wind moving. For a second, he thinks he is seeing wrong. Then he runs, a few steps, his heart dropping, his throat closing. He calls her name, calls again, and silence answers. And in that moment, Scott understands something brutal. Some robberies do not need guns. They only need one person to turn away at the perfect time and leave everyone else standing inside the hollow space of trust. When the news of the missing armored truck spreads, Las Vegas stops feeling like a city of lights and starts feeling like a city with its nerves pulled tight. Police lock down streets, comb routes, question people, and within hours, the case outgrows the local level. The FBI steps in. A file is opened. Heather's photo appears on television, on posters, in breaking news banners. A 21-year-old face, still young, now paired with words that make people shiver: fugitive, armed, dangerous. People talk about her like a ghost. Many believe she has already been killed by her partner because they cannot imagine a girl like that running on her own. But Heather is alive. She is just alive as someone not allowed to exist. After flights and zigzags meant to confuse any trail, they reach Street Martin, then Amsterdam. In unfamiliar airports, among crowds and quick glances, Heather learns to lower her face. Learn to walk a little faster when someone calls out. Learn to check windows before turning on lights. And the first thing she cuts away is not her hair, not her clothes, but her real name. A false name, then another. A fake passport, fake papers, thin pieces of material that decide whether you cross a border or not. Heather lives on cash jobs, cleaning rooms, mopping floors, changing sheets for other people. She cannot leave a trace. No bank account, no contracts, no calls home. Each day feels like walking on thin ice. One wrong knock at the door and everything shatters. In 1994, Heather gives birth to a boy, Dylan. The small, warm weight in her arms feels real, like a rope pulling her back toward the ordinary person she thought she had lost. She looks at her son and tells herself that even if her own life has been erased from the world, her child must still get a childhood that is true. But Roberto does not change. He does not become a father. He becomes more controlling, more paranoid, and every time he scans the room as if watched, cold runs down Heather's spine. She realizes the man who once pulled her from the bottom is now pulling her deeper. Then Heather decides to leave. A decision without noise, without goodbye. Only a mother lifting her child and walking out of a home where she can no longer breathe. She changes addresses, changes names, disappears inside the same city where people can lose each other forever. And the bitterest part is that Roberto does not hunt her down. He does not call. He does not care. He keeps the money, almost all of it. He keeps the power and vanishes as if he never existed. Heather does not have luxury rooms, does not have glamorous travel, does not have the stolen money lifestyle people imagine. She has a mop, a bucket, and mornings so cold her hands go numb in water. She has Dylan, a child growing into small, ordinary joys. School, guitar practice, sports, laughing when his mother buys him something cheap from a corner shop. But behind those ordinary moments is fear that never leaves. Fear of being exposed. Fear of her son asking about grandparents. Fear of a letter arriving with the wrong name. Fear of a neighbor who looks too closely. Some nights, after Dylan is asleep, Heather turns on the television and sees herself. America's Most Wanted. her face on the screen, the narration calling her a dangerous fugitive. She sits still, both hands around a cup of cold tea, eyes unblinking. On the screen, people imagine her living rich on stolen cash. In real life, she only prays that tomorrow no one knocks on her door and Dylan reaches school safely. The world thinks she is spending stolen money. She is scrubbing floors to raise her child. And that is the cruelest contradiction of this escape. You can outrun police, outrun borders, outrun posters, but you cannot outrun waking up every day and asking what you are paying for and who truly walked away with everything. In 2004, Dylan turns 10, an age when a child begins to see the world with more serious eyes, begins to ask more questions, begins to feel what adults try to hide. Heather watches her son practice guitar in their small Amsterdam room, watches small fingers struggle to press the right chord, and suddenly realizes she is stealing something basic from him: a real name, a real home, a life that does not have to keep its head down. Dylan deserves to grow up without carrying his mother's fear, without learning to go quiet when people ask about family, without living inside a story built out of fake papers. In that moment, Heather understands the escape is not only imprisoning her, it is imprisoning her child too. In September 2005, Heather decides to end it, not because she has run out of road, but because she is exhausted from being someone who does not exist. She uses a fake passport to fly through Los Angeles, then onward to Las Vegas, the city where it all began. On that flight, she is no longer the 21-year-old from 1993. She is a mother in her 30s, carrying 12 years of shadow, carrying a fear with nowhere left to put it. She leaves Dylan in Amsterdam with friends, tells him to practice, to finish his homework, promises she will see him soon. A promise caught in her throat, because she cannot be sure she will ever return in the same shape. On the 15th of September 2005, in the morning, Heather walks into the U.S. Marshal's office in Las Vegas with a lawyer. There is no chase, no dramatic tackle, just a woman standing straight and saying 4 words: "I am turning myself in." The room goes still. They are used to hunting, used to tracing footprints through darkness. This is a person stepping out of darkness on her own legs. Heather sits down and begins to tell it. The warehouse with the fake sign, the memorized route, the old woman disguised in a wheelchair, the man in a doctor's coat pushing her onto a plane, and 12 years in Amsterdam living under other names. She speaks tired but clear, as if she has repeated this story to herself for too many nights. When asked why she came back, Heather says something simple and human. Living under a false name is a mental prison, and a mental prison is cruel because there are no bars. Yet you still cannot walk out. You eat in fear. You sleep in fear. You love your child in fear. The FBI asks about Roberto. Heather shakes her head. She says they separated in 1995, never met again, does not know if he is alive or dead. Asked about the $3.1 million, she answers straight. Roberto kept almost all of it. She got almost nothing. Saying that out loud is admitting the bitterest truth. She traded her life, her name, her youth, even her child's peace, and the man who manipulated her walked away with the money and vanished without a trace. In March 2006, in federal court in Las Vegas, Heather pleads guilty. The defense talks about manipulation, about the years she was already broken before the heist. The prosecution talks about responsibility, about choice, about the cost paid by others. Then the sentence is read: 5 years and 1 month, plus $2.9 million in restitution. Heather listens without tears, without a big reaction. She simply nods like someone finally allowed to stop running. She accepts it. No appeal. Because for her, a real prison is easier than waking up every day and pretending to be someone else. And beneath everything, the image that tightens your throat is still a mother placing a hand on her son's shoulder in a small Amsterdam room, understanding that the truth may break their lives, but the lie will break them for sure. Heather returns to pay, not because she forgets the harm, but because she refuses to let Dylan grow up inside its shadow. This heist had no gunfire, no crew, no Hollywood shootout, only a clean pair of dress shoes in the morning, and a map memorized until it became reflex. One press of the gas, one warehouse door opening, and $3.1 million left in armored truck. As if it never belonged to anyone, Roberto disappeared. No one knows if he is alive or dead. The money disappeared with him, like a dark stain that cannot be traced to the end. Heather did not disappear. She came back, walked into a real prison to close the mental prison that held her for 12 years. But this story does not end with a clear answer. It ends with a question that steals sleep. Was Heather a victim, manipulated, broken at the weakest moment? Or was she an accomplice who chose to cross the line and only regretted it when everything was already too late? If you were the jury, how would you rule? Comment A if you think she was a victim. Comment B if you think she was an accomplice. I will pin the most convincing argument.